The problem with that is that you were drinking for a reason in the first place, usually to cope with an underlying discomfort. And so you stop drinking and that underlying discomfort's still there. And unless that's addressed, there's always this potential for you wanting to drink again because you haven't resolved the underlying discomfort. Before you know it, you're in a room like I was with bottles of vodka under your bed and a vial of pills next to you and no one around. And that sure sounds like a lot of fun, doesn't it? Because all the people have gone, you burned all the bridges, no one's interested in you anymore because you're not adding any value to their lives. You're actually detracting.
The paradox of alcohol is that we rely on it to build new relationships, yet over time, it often erodes the very connection it helped create. George, I want us to start this conversation with you sharing your story with alcohol addiction, how it started, the ups and downs of alcoholism, up until the point where you are right now.
Sure. Hi, Francesco. It's nice to be on with you.
Nice to have you.
So I've been in recovery 12 years and I'm 64. So I hit a hard bottom at the age of 52. And it was from alcohol addiction as well as pain pill addiction. So I was using a combination of both. And it was a real difficult time in my life. I was out of control. I just simply could not stop using and drinking. I'd gotten so bad that, my wife had left me. She took our animals. I was kind of all alone, hitting this bottom, having to constantly drink and use just to keep my body from shutting down and withdrawing. I couldn't sleep more than an hour or two without having to, drink and take more pills just to keep my body settled down. So it was a very traumatic experience. It culminated about 34 years of alcohol and drug use, coping with some underlying mental and behavioral patterns that I had started and that came from childhood and that I carried with me through adulthood. And they were uncomfortable and they caused me to act out, get angry, be defensive, be hypersensitive. And I chose to cope with drugs and alcohol, as many people do, to relieve the symptoms. And, I have a lot of addiction in my family. And so when you combine a hereditary addiction, genetic predisposition to addiction, combine that with childhood trauma issues or things that happen in childhood that are uncomfortable, when you put those two things together, you're 8 times more likely to develop an addiction than you are if you don't have those things. And then if you start using and drinking in childhood before the age of, let's say early 20s, you're also much more likely to develop an addiction. And that's because the front part of our brains haven't developed fully yet. The prefrontal cortex is in the front part of our brain that control our thinking and judgment and impulse control and decision making. And so what happens is the reward parts of the brain are so powerful and fully developed that they overrule or take over predominance in the whole mental or neural architecture in the brain, that it overpowers the decision-making capability because it's not fully developed. So, it's what happened to me. And I just lived my life that way, uncomfortable, coping with drugs and alcohol until I hit this bottom. And then I had a really come to Jesus moment where I had to look myself in the mirror and decide, was this it for me? Was that how I was going to go out from this world? And fortunately, I was able to summon up enough strength and inner will to see what was next and to try to change, to try to become something different, something more meaningful, purposeful. And that's what started my journey to recovery.
Fascinating. And you hear this very often in stories such as yours, that people, unless they hit that rock bottom, they are often in denial, or even if they're not in denial, is that the rock bottom that really pushes them for change. So I'm just wondering, do you think that's something that is necessary for people to reinvent themselves when they're struggling with any addiction, but especially perhaps with the alcohol? Is it that we are not strong-willed enough until, life slaps us in the face with the worst that, the worst state that we can be in?
History shows that many people need that in order to change. And the reason for that is neurologically in the brain. The brain's main job is to keep us alive and to keep our systems working and to look out in the environment and detect threats and keep us alive from them. Okay. So the problem that the brain has with change is that it already knows what you've experienced in your life and it knows that it hasn't killed you yet. So it likes what's familiar and what it already knows.
Mhm.
And so that's what keeps us stuck in our patterns, is because the brain knows that so far it has kept you alive. And so when you're considering changing
Right.
into something else, it doesn't know what that is yet. You can try to talk your brain into, well, I have to change, and, I can't keep going the way I'm going. I'm being told that life's better on the other side, but your brain doesn't know that yet. Your brain only knows what it has experienced. And so that's what causes change to be hard, is that the brain needs reward, it needs incentive, it needs to know you're going to be safe, it needs to know that that journey it's about to take with you is going to keep you alive, and that there's reward in it for the brain. The brain doesn't like to do things unless it feels reward. And that's why it gets so hung up on addiction, is because there's a lot of reward in it. There's a ton of dopamine reward that
Mhm.
these drugs and alcohol and behaviors give off. So much reward that it's so much greater than anything else we can experience in life. That's all we want to do, is use those drugs and alcohol. And so that's what makes it so um, deleterious, is that the dopamine rushes we get off these drugs and alcohol and behaviors are so high, so much higher than we can get on everything else, that it becomes very hard cycle to escape. Okay. And so that's why people have to hit bottoms, is it has to get so bad that they just simply can't keep doing what they're doing, or they're going to die. And so the brain says, okay, I recognize you're about to die. And so maybe I'm willing to now go along with you and see what this is all about, this idea of change.
I see. So yeah, it's not very pleasant hitting rock bottom, but perhaps it is necessary. So George, where do we draw the line between frequent alcohol consumption and addiction?
That's the problem, is that it's progressive, and when we're in it, we don't believe that we're going to cross this line in the sand that goes from impulsive, being able to use drugs and alcohol when we want to. We cross a line that we don't see coming, and that line is compulsivity, where we no longer have control, it has control of us.
Mhm.
And I can't even tell you like exactly when that happened to me, because that line comes up on you. Addiction is so secretive and stealthy and sly. It's actually undefeated. Addiction's never been defeated. A lot of the smartest people in the world that have been addicted have tried to figure out how to still use and drink, and they've never figured it out. It always gets everybody in the end. So it just is waiting, and it's coaxing you along until it has you completely, and then it has its grips on you, and you are no longer in control of its use. It
Mhm.
controls you. Unless you've been through it, it's really hard to understand how that might be. But I'll tell you what, it's scary and ugly when you know that you've lost control.
Right. It has control over you. The thing is that people tend to have a narrative in their heads of what addiction looks like. And that narrative is strongly related with hard drugs and junkies. And so they fail to realize that drinking a glass of wine every day for months can still be the beginning of an addiction. Then vaping, cigarettes, sugar, porn, all fill in the gap for psychological need, which through habit formation later develops in psychological dependency, which later develops into addiction. So we have to be very careful deciding what addiction looks like for us. so that we don't fall in this self-imposed mental trick that, can lead us to addiction later. Where do you think this disconnect comes from, thinking that we are safe from alcohol but not from cocaine? Is it strictly the legality of it, or are there any other factors?
Well, yeah, I'm not sure about being safe from it.
But we have this illusion, like we think, like it's fine, it's alcohol, I can drink. It's like a false safety in our minds. We trick ourselves into thinking that this is not an addiction. It's just a glass of Chardonnay every evening for me to release some steam after work. So that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I mean that's probably has quite a bit to do with it. I mean, you're reinforced, you're assured that this is okay, and by culture because it's available on every street corner, right? I mean, if how can it be taboo if it's commercially acceptable, right, and culturally acceptable? So I think that's part of it. I think a big thing that people need to watch out for is, once you start to cope with it, use it to cope with underlying discomfort, um, then then that means you're no longer doing it impulsively to enjoy an experience. You're actually relying on it to ease as a medical lozenge, so to speak, to ease discomfort. And that means then you begin to develop this neurological pattern that says every time I feel uncomfortable, this is what I do. I ease the discomfort through drugs and alcohol. And in any pattern, anything that we learn, any skill we have, any thought, any recurring thoughts that we have, recurring emotions, recurring actions like that, what happens is that neurons in the brain begin to connect to one another with neurotransmission, chemical and electrical signals, and they form strings that represent these patterns. And so this idea that, you have stress, you drink a glass of wine a night, and you just feel that becoming a pattern, it's represented by these neurons connecting to each other. And the more that you do it, and the more that you rely on it, and the more that you need it and look forward to it and establish an emotional connection to it that says, I can't. I mean, we've all been there, stressed at the end of the day, have that glass of wine, that relief that washes over us. I mean, that's a pretty, emotionally charged experience, right? I mean, it's like stress relief. I mean, that builds a connection right there between those two things. And you start doing it every night. And now you've built this pattern in your brain, and that's what your brain knows to do when you're uncomfortable. And so you're neurologically, your brain begins to rely on it as a coping mechanism. So yeah,
Right.
very dangerous.
Right. And I believe one of the worst things someone can do is say, I need a drink. Like, no, craving a drink is not a need. Every time you tell yourself, I need a drink, you're wiring your brain to associate that phrase with relief. So you're training your mind to to crave alcohol every time you entered a similar emotional or psychological state. So perhaps changing our phrasing and say, oh, a drink would be nice tonight. Oh, I wouldn't mind a drink after all. But when we say that I need it just reinforces our patterns and behaviors and habits.
I, I couldn't agree with you more. The use of words, just as simple as I want a drink versus I need a drink, are two completely different
Absolutely.
phrasings. They represent two completely different attachments to the drug or the alcohol. You can, even if when you say those words, you have emotional reactions to them differently. And so when these patterns that develop in the brain neurologically all form with thought, imagery, emotion, they're all wrapped up together to make this experience of having that drink. And so you're right that every element of that is critical in forming the specific type of pattern that we're talking about. And when you start crossing into, I need a drink, that's a dangerous signal that says, I no longer want one impulsively. I kind of need one compulsively.
And yeah, and it doesn't help that alcohol is just everywhere you go. I remember I was at Stansted Airport here in London very recently, and 60-70% of the duty-free aisles were just booze. And then you have about 20% perfumes and 10% is just sugar. So there's nothing there of nutrition when it comes to like food, but also it's like, why do I need alcohol before my flight? Or are you implying that I'm gonna need it duty free, so when I'm gonna land, what I want to do is drink again? It's like, why do we need so much alcohol in airports? It's just
Yeah,
everywhere. You can't escape it.
I'm not even sure if it makes financial sense. Like, are you really saving that much by taking it with you? I just never understood that. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's like you say, it's all around us. And, I think a big part of it is just people in our society, they struggle. A lot of it develops in childhood with how they were raised. They have these mental and emotional discomforts that originated from their upbringing. And we can go into that in more detail if you want. But you talk to most addicts and alcoholics, and a lot of their issues started in childhood and they carried those with them into adulthood, and they just never learned to change them, and they started coping with drugs and alcohol, and then it just kind of all wrapped up together, and they just didn't know any different, and that's how they dealt with life. And they kept reenacting those same patterns over and over again in terms of the same unhelpful thoughts, the same unhelpful emotions. A lot of times we deal with things in adulthood as a result of how we were trained in childhood. And so, if I can give you an example, if we have
Hmm.
time for that,
Of course.
I was raised in a family that moved a lot. My dad was a corporate executive, and he moved up the ranks very quickly. And we were always moving from one city to the next every 12 months. And so I was constantly having to leave this city, go to another one. And this started at a very young age, constantly having to move out of a school, move into a new one. And I just got really tired of it and uncomfortable with having to meet new people, say goodbye to people, get my feelings hurt, and so after a while, I just kind of shut down. I just no longer wanted to establish relationships with people because it was hard. And there was negative emotions attached to both meeting new people and saying goodbye to old ones. And so even to this day, I'm very much a loner. I don't need other people. And so my conditioning is a result of um, the way I was brought up. And that's just one example. And people have all kinds of other examples. If they were raised in dysfunctional homes, a lot of arguing, any kind of abuse, any kind of addiction, physical spanking, that kind of stuff has negative effects on people. A lot of people grow up not feeling comfortable in their own skin, a lot of self doubt, a lot of self esteem issues. And these are uncomfortable. And we don't know how to address them, how to cause change to happen. And so we just carry these symptoms with us into adulthood. We find drugs and alcohol. It makes the problem better, albeit temporarily, but it's better than nothing. And that's how the addiction pattern starts.
Right. Right. And as you just mentioned, people that grow up with this kind of trauma, they are not happy with their current identity, and that's one of the reasons where alcohol comes in, and people can stop consuming alcohol, is that drinking has become part of their identity, so that they could forget their old identity. And now for so many people, the whole personality revolves around drinking. It's just what they do after work, what they do in the weekends, how they relax at home, how they celebrate achievements, how they down their sadness. Everything revolves around drinking. So that's why an identity change is crucial if we want to cut the booze. So yeah, I think it's just one identity replacing the other, and now it's not, identity change is not easy, but it's necessary.
Yeah. So, very good question. Very good point. And so, the brain, all mental life is constructed. And so, like, our identity isn't housed in a little compartment of the brain called identity compartment. And all of our thoughts and emotions aren't housed in little compartments for each individual thought and emotion that we've ever had. Every time we have any mental experience, including an identity, it emerges in real time. Now, it uses a set of ingredients to create that experience. including conceptual understanding or experiences from the past that are like the ones that we're in now. It also uses our sensory information, how our body feels at the time, what we lock our attention onto. So, without getting too far in the weeds, it's pulling on certain ingredients and emerging, causing an emotion or a thought or an identity to emerge out of these ingredients. The issue is that, um, we have these recurring senses of ourselves, these identities that keep propagating themselves over and over again. And like you say, they're attached to alcohol and so on. And so until we dive deep into that identity, examine it, and that's what I help do in my coaching, is pick that current identity apart and decide how it was constructed in the first place, because that's what's happening is we keep reconstructing the identity, and it's not serving us well, right? It's causing us to experience life in an unpleasant way. So we break down that into really little bits and pieces, examine the parts that we don't like, or that the belief systems that we have that are limiting us and aren't serving us well. And then we say, okay, let's change those. Let's create a new version of ourselves that we want for the future. And we totally reconstruct a new identity around what that person is. And then change starts, where we begin to shift from the current old identity into the new identity. And that's the challenge, is being able to get from one to the other. And that's where the work is, to incent the brain through reward to come with you along for the journey. Because again, it doesn't know that that new identity is safe yet. And so we have to help it along. And that's why change feels hard, is because we have to work at it. It's conscious. It feels like willpower. It feels like, and it is. We have to summon motivation and commitment with the belief that that new identity is going to serve us better. Even though we don't know quite what it is yet, or we haven't experienced it, we've designed it on paper, and we start to envision it and daydream about it and picture it and feel the emotion around it, but we're not there yet. And so that's what it causes change to be hard. And it takes weeks, if not months, of work to the brain begin to shift. And what's happening during this shifting process is this new identity begins to form new neural connections in the brain that represent new ways of being. So if you start behaving differently and thinking and emoting differently, your neurons begin to shift around and start to develop new patterns representing this new way of being. And the old patterns, which used to be very predominant and strong, begin to weaken. The metaphor I use is that, think of a tree, a big old tree in your backyard, big oak tree that's got these gnarly roots that are big and strong and deeply embedded, and that's old us. Those are the patterns that we've developed. Well, so now what we're going to do is we're going to stop watering that tree, and we're going to stop fertilizing it, and we're going to plant this new tree over here that's small and weak at the start, but we're going to fertilize the hell out of it and water the hell out of it through repetition and reenacting all these new thoughts, feelings, and actions. And little by little, that old tree with all those big, deep-seated roots is going to start to weaken and go more dormant. And eventually that big old tree is going to die and tip over. And this new tree, as long as we're focused on it and fastidious in reenacting these patterns over and over again, it's going to start to grow and gain strength. These root systems are going to go deeper. And before you know it, with this work, you are just so far over here on this the site of the plot of this new tree, watering it and fertilizing it all the time, you've almost forgotten about what this was before. And it feels so good and rewarding naturally to think, feel, and behave this new way, that your brain is now comfortable with it, because you're not dying. you actually feel better than you did in the old way. And so it wants to stay there because it's more rewarding. The old way with addiction was rewarding for a little while until it became a pain in the ass. And the only reason the brain won't leave it is because it knows it hasn't killed you yet and it doesn't know what's over here. So that's the, very basic example I have for what this change looks like.
No, very, very relatable actually. And something very important you said there is it takes years and persistent effort. You don't plant the seed and get the tree in a day. And that's my problem with dry January is that where, you are challenged not to drink for a month because it takes you from being an everyday drinker to doing cold turkey and not touching alcohol for 30 days. But that doesn't help you because soon you're going to get back and you might start drinking even more because you missed it. So the goal is not to stay sober for 1 month of the year. The goal is to have healthy habits, day to day, to have self control, to fix our sleep and achieve mental clarity. And all these things take small, deliberate efforts over long periods of time. And not by doing a trendy challenge so that you can boast, to your friends about it. Oh, I'm doing dry January, I'm not touching alcohol. Is not really helping you, is not really serving you.
Yeah. And the reason it's not helping you is because you've already told yourself before dry January that, okay, it's only a month. You have not tied this change into any type of change of your identity. There is no connection to the inner fabric of who you are that's going to give you some level of reward. I mean, if you're not an addict or you're not an alcoholic and you could take it or leave it, and you can take it or leave it, and that truly means that dry January shouldn't be a big deal if you can truly take it or leave it. But if it is a struggle for you, then that's telling you something. And so the fact that, just surviving for a month by not drinking doesn't change anything about you. It just means you've given your body a respite for 30 days. And whatever that may do for your body in terms of a cleanse, okay, but it has done nothing to reorganize the neurons in your brain. You're going to go right back to where those neurons haven't reshifted at all. You're pressing the pause button, and your brain knows it because you've already told it that whole idea you were talking about before in terms of the words you use. What you tell the brain. Um, Let me give you another thing about the brain: is visualizing something is the same as actually doing it. Your brain doesn't know the difference. So let's say that you're, practicing an instrument. You can practice it with, in real life with your fingers and all of that, but then you can also visualize it, like close your eyes and visualize your hands moving on the instrument. Your brain thinks it's the same thing. It actually likes different ways of experiencing the same thing. It learns better that way. It helps cement it in its neurology better that way. And so if you tell your brain anything, it's listening. And so when you tell it that, okay, this is only for 30 months, it knows that you're just putting this on pause. You're not looking for any change. You'll be right back to what you were doing, February 1st.
Right. And if someone has identified that they have a drinking problem, what would be the best path for them to take? What are the first steps so that they can slowly make their way through alcohol addiction?
Well, people quit substance use and abuse any number of different ways. Some can just stop cold turkey. I've heard stories that people just stop and they identify something that's more important to them than the drinking and they latch onto it. Maybe it's a health scare. Maybe it's a parent or sibling that died from it, but just something that's an awakening or a consequence that they've had, and they can just simply go cold turkey. Um, the problem with that is that you were drinking for a reason in the first place, usually to cope with an underlying discomfort. And so you stop drinking, and that underlying discomfort's still there.
Right.
And unless that's addressed, there's always this potential for you wanting to drink again because you haven't resolved the underlying discomfort. You haven't changed these underlying experiences that you're having that cause you to want to drink in the first place. So recovering from addiction is a twofold thing. One is the addiction itself, which requires time and space from the substance or behavior to allow the roots of that tree to start to go weak and ultimately dormant, while you're changing the underlying patterns that are causing you to want to use and drink in the first place. And that also involves change of neurons and your physiology in your brain to allow you to start taking the elements of that experience that are uncomfortable, those thoughts and emotions, and breaking them down into their bits and pieces, finding out the elements of that, and then reconstructing new ways. It's the same thing, same process we talked about before with our identity. Every part of mental life can be broken down and then reconstructed in a more helpful way. And so the problem is, how are you going to do that on your own? Do you even know that this is what is needed? And so, there's great programs out there in addition to like my type of coaching, like 12-step programs, which don't really focus on this neurology, the neurological aspects of what happens in these programs. They have other building blocks and other formats and processes that they use. They're not tying it to the brain, but that's actually what's happening, is they're giving you space and time between the time you last used your drug or alcohol, allowing those roots to weaken while they're trying to introduce
Mm.
other things in your life that will give you comfort. In the case of AA, it's spirituality based, right? So
Yeah.
the idea is, okay, you seek comfort with your relationship with a higher power, which gives you enough reward and a place to go to. And also, you're in a group of other like minded people that are trying to do the same thing, which is also very comforting. And so the idea is that process is taking you into a place that, um, is a better version of what you've been doing. I personally find that understanding the neurology of it is very helpful because it helps you understand and get your arms around really what is happening in your brain that needs to happen. And that was very helpful for me, so that I knew I could I'm just a guy that needs to understand why and how and where. And it helps you really grab a hold of the process and want to engage in it. But, I think you have to decide, can you do it on your own? Do you need help? 12-step programs are a great place to go and start because there's help there. And, it's spirituality based, and they have one specific focal point and angle on it and vision of it. But what I do is I design things that people like in their lives anyway, that they want to have, that are going to give them pleasure. Because really, at the root of it is, you need to find a more pleasurable way of being than where you've been. And so if you have to design your life with practices and activities that are meaningful, that give you joy and reward, because that's where you need to go to. And if it's not joyful and rewarding, then who the hell wants to do that anyway, right?
Exactly. Okay, so that's when someone wants to help themselves and goes through these programs such as AA or your coaching. How about if someone is in a stage where perhaps not in denial, but they're not ready yet to seek help? Then what is the best way, for example, for friends and family to help someone with a drinking problem without enabling them further?
Yeah, have a loving heart to heart conversation. Do the best you can with it. At the end of the day, um, the only thing that's going to get the person help is themselves. But you can certainly notify the person that you've noticed a change. You're concerned. You love them. Do they want or need help? Offer your assistance that way. The yelling and the screaming and if you don't stop, I'm going to do this.
Terrible.
That only makes it worse, because you're adding more anxiety and anguish on top of what they're already feeling and coping with. So I know that that's the problem. The rub here is that people's behavior when they're addicts and alcoholics isn't great. It's all about them. It's all about the drug and the alcohol, and to hell with anyone else around them. That's what addiction looks like. And so people get tired of it, right? Friends and family get tired of dealing with the consequences and the rudeness and the lack of caring. And so, not everybody's going to, in the face of that, come to the alcoholic and addict and say, hey, I'm worried about you, show the care and concern. So, to the best of your ability, yeah, have that conversation, be direct, be firm, but be kind, compassionate, empathetic, offer your assistance, but don't get your hopes up and don't get offended when the person continues to use, because everyone finds, it takes what it takes. Everybody finds their own point at which they're willing to accept change. And there's not much that anybody else can do about it. And like I told you in my story, I had to hit a rock bottom
Mhm.
before I was willing.
No, that's solid advice. That sounds like solid advice. And the thing with alcohol is it becomes tricky because it masquerades as a solution to the breakup, a solution to the social anxiety, but it is just hidden poison making its way to a heart, to the liver, to the brain, one sip at a time. That's the problem. Like one sip is harmless, one drink is harmless, but then add the compounding effect that has over the years, and then drinking suddenly becomes a problem rather than a solution. So it can be very sneaky.
Yeah, that's what tolerance is, right? Our the neurons in our brain, which there's no buzz that you'll ever get that was as good as the first one. The first one's always the best. And then because the neurons in the brain are not supposed to have this much dopamine firing through it, they begin to like whack out. It's like trying to funnel 500 gallons of water through a little garden hose. Like the amount of dopamine that's triggered with these substances is far greater than the brain was ever designed to handle.
Yeah.
And so what happens is the neurons begin to change and shut down, and the receptors that receive the dopamine from the other neuron, because they connect together through dendrites, um, the receptors begin to close up and shut down because it's getting flooded with too much dopamine. So there's fewer and fewer receptors becoming available over the years to receive the dopamine. So the response is we have to flood more and more dopamine. We have to drink more and more, use more and more to get the same effect because the dopamine's not being received in the same quantities that it once was. And so that's just a natural response of the brain, which is what tolerance is. So that's why we have to keep using more and more and more.
Mhm.
And you're not even getting as good a feeling because the receptors are shutting down. You're just trying to feel normal, um,
Yeah.
whatever normal is. And the problem is that, these withdrawals, which is the drop from, okay, you drink or you use the drug, you get a spike of dopamine, but then the crash is what the withdrawal is. So the dopamine spikes, it starts to drop, you feel withdrawal, you feel like garbage because it's dropping from such elevated levels down to way down low that you will do anything to start using again. And that's a vicious cycle of tolerance, withdrawal, and why we just keep chasing this first buzz that we ever got that we're never going to get again.
You said it. We're never gonna get it again. So that's the paradox. The U.S. So this happened in January, this January. So the U.S. Surgeon General's advisory announced on January 2025 that alcohol is linked to 7 types of cancer: liver cancer, breast cancer, throat cancer, and a few more. They even say that casual drinking is bad for you now, which somehow we were made to believe that a glass of red wine was good for you, even if it was every day because it's red wine. And we somehow convinced that it's okay even for pregnant women. So we know alcohol damages our DNA, right? But we're told pregnant women that a glass of red wine contains antioxidants and it helps with your HDL cholesterol, the good cholesterol. So it's okay to have it. Yeah, but red wine still damages your DNA. Can you not get your antioxidants from somewhere else? So I can't even imagine the damage we've caused to so many unborn babies with this nonsense. And they're just coming up with this science now, but yeah, it's just crazy how much damage we've done potentially.
Yeah, well, red grapes are fabulous for you. Just don't ferment them. So I eat all kinds of red grapes.
Mm.
The resveratrol, which is in the skin of red grapes, also green grapes, but more prevalent in red grapes, is incredibly good for you. It has all kinds of antioxidant capability in it. It's actually been being studied that it may extend life because of how much toxin it pulls out of your body. So eat all the red grapes you want, but it's the alcohol that is the causing the inflammatory effects in the body and the mind, the brain. That is, inflammation is the source of the cancers and all the cognitive diseases, Alzheimer's, dementia. So that's the culprit. It's the alcohol.
Yeah. I was just thinking that alcohol is just a depressant that allows people to lower their social guard, relax their social filtering, and help them to temporarily forget their insecurities and anxieties that usually inhibits them from having a lax social interaction. And that goes back to what we were saying, like people think they need it, but they don't. It's pure self-induced conditioning. So we have conditioned ourselves to fall prey to these patterns and habits of addiction. So that's where I think accountability comes in a lot. And just saying to yourself, just recognizing that in a way we did this to ourselves. There's no one else to blame out there.
So um, the two things we get when we drink, like you were saying, was we get a rush of euphoria, the dopamine from the drug or the alcohol. But then the effect is that our nervous system switches from a sympathetic, stressed out state to a relaxed and rested state called the parasympathetic nervous system. So it's a shifting of the nervous system, and it's a release of dopamine where we feel euphoria and reward. So those are actually the two physiological things that are happening, right? So if we could replicate that by not drinking, the alcohol or the drug, wouldn't that be great? So the issue is, you mentioned accountability, yeah, but accountability sure doesn't sound like a lot of fun when what you're really looking for is a change in your nervous system to be relaxed and some reward. And so what we do is we try to find other ways equally as enjoying or that have even additional benefits beyond the regulating of the nervous system and the dopamine. It also, we're proud of ourselves. We know we can do it without having to drink. So it ties it back into this healthier version of our identity. It ties into things that are important to us, the way we want to be. We want to be responsible. We want to be accountable in the sense that, we're true to ourselves and who we want to be. So that's what we try to tie into, is to create a substitute for the drinking that becomes more rewarding than what we're giving up. And that's what it's hard for alcoholics and addicts to envision, is that there is something else that's as good or better than what they've been doing, because it's all they know.
Right. And that's perhaps for many addictions, the first step is to replace it with a less severe addiction or habit, because it's easier to replace it with something than to cut it altogether. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's
you're talking about transferring addictions. That's what happened to me, is I went from, pain pills and alcohol to sugar. I still, if I'm not careful and really stay fastidious to my program, um, I have a tendency to want to have sugar. It's like I can't have any, or it just opens the floodgates. It's like I have this addictive personality. When I have any little bit of anything that gives me dopamine like that, I just can't stop. And so I've had to like recognize this about myself. And so I just have to find other things that give me pleasure, and then attach to it the fact that it's going to make me feel so much better about myself intrinsically, like deep down, that I add that on to, let's just say I was eating red grapes instead of ice cream. So then the red grapes are good by themselves, but then I get the additional boost from it being responsible, and it being true to my identity, and it being, in alignment with one of my values, which is health and well-being. So that's what we work on, is to create this bundle of reward that becomes more meaningful than the ice cream. Because the ice cream will give you that quick dopamine rush of the sugar, but then you feel like crap afterwards. And
Yeah.
so this new reward, you want to say, well, I don't want to feel like crap afterwards. I want to feel good and really in tune, in touch with my values and my identity. And we have to sit there and experience that goodness, and let the mind, the brain feel that reward in order for it to stick, in order for it to become part of that pathway that says, yeah, I'm going to keep doing the grapes.
Well said. Well said. One of the things that perhaps is often overlooked with alcohol or any addiction for that matter is the social damage it does to your relationships. Because as you already said, is people who are addicts, perhaps they're more self-centered and it's just them and the addiction. And that starts to slowly deteriorate your relationship, especially with family. And the paradox of alcohol is that we rely on it to build new relationships, yet over time, it often erodes the very connection it helped create. So we have to be very careful because it's not that you're just messing up yourself, is that your child, your brother, your cousin, your father, all those people around you who, if at worst case scenario, rely on you, best case scenario, they just want to be around you and they want to, they want a good relationship.
Yeah. So addiction changes us. It what happens is we head down this path, and we don't head down it, but addiction takes us. It becomes more important than anything else in our lives, and that's because it delivers more dopamine than these social connections do. And so, um, we get dopamine increases from certain life pleasures that were wired into us because the creators determined that we needed these things in order to survive. So it's things like having sex because, we want sex to feel good so that we have babies to keep the species going.
Yeah.
We want to feel good when we eat because if we don't eat, we'll die. We want to feel good when we drink water because if we don't, we'll die of thirst. We want to band together in social connections because in the olden days when we were cavemen, the dinosaurs would pick us off if we were off there by ourselves and we would never survive as a species. So we had to band together in tribes in order to fend off the dinosaurs. And so God, or whatever your creator is, made us feel good when we have social connection.
Mhm.
So we get dopamine from all of those things naturally, but none of those measure up to the dopamine we get from the drugs and the alcohol. So, what happens is that if you're getting dopamine of 1,000 from a drug or an alcohol and only 100 from a social connection, what does your brain want? It wants the drug or the alcohol. And so we begin to ignore the social connections. We ignore what it takes to keep the social connection going. We ignore any aspect of it because our brain is drawn to the drug or the alcohol. So, yeah, I mean, part of the social connection is both of us getting some reward from it. And if we're not holding up our end of it, if we're not giving any value to the other person, what's in it for them to want to, they're not getting any reward from it either. And so before you know it, you're in a room like I was with bottles of vodka under your bed and a vial of pills next to you and no one around. And that sure sounds like a lot of fun, doesn't it? Because all the people have gone, you burned all the bridges, no one's interested in you anymore because you're not adding any value to their lives. You're actually detracting. So there you are, you're alone.
Yeah. George, what do you think people get wrong about alcohol addiction? What do they get the most wrong about it?
I suppose it's, not going to happen to me. For some reason, they just feel that. I mean, my son, as an example, he has addiction in his genes, and he saw me go through it. He experienced it firsthand, and yet he became an alcoholic. And so, um, the powerful effects, the rewarding effects of what drugs and alcohol can do to the brain early on are so enticing, so inviting that almost, you'll ignore the front part of your brain, which is telling you, hey, ease up. This isn't a good idea. You've got addiction in your family. Look what your dad's going through. Maybe I shouldn't do this. Some people react that way, and God bless them. He didn't. And, took them down the same path. So, especially if you have these risk profiles where you have addiction in your family and you have childhood experiences that weren't pleasant, even traumatic, the combination of those two make you 8 to 10 times more likely that you're going to be an addict. And then if you start using and drinking before your front part of your brain's fully developed, like you start drinking in your teens, the front part of your brain isn't developed enough to tell the reward part of your brain that isn't a good idea. I mean, you're as good as dead. You're as good as addicted at that point. And so it's a toughie. Best advice is to you know not use or drink at all, especially if you're trying to cope with something.
Right, right, George. Last question. What do you want to be remembered for?
Helping people change, helping people find better versions of themselves, find transformation, know that change is possible, reach out, get help, and find better versions of themselves, because the science is there. Science is proven. Our brains are capable of change. All change happens in the brain. All of this stuff we've been talking about today exists in the brain. That's where it resides. And so the brain is forgiving. It is malleable. It will change, adapt, and evolve with you as long as you're willing to go through the initial challenges of enticing the brain to go with you. But there is hope there. There's nothing that will stop you from achieving change if you're willing to stick with it.
That's wonderful. George Haymaker, thank you very much for the conversation, sir.
My pleasure. And if anybody wants to reach out, you can find me at georgehaymaker.com. That's HAYMAKER.com. GeorgeHaymaker.com. Love to chat with you. There's a link there for free discovery call. 30 minutes. We can chat about your situation and see if we're a good fit to work together.
Fantastic. And I'll make sure I'll attach these links on the description below as well.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Great conversation.